Once you master these stitches, you'll be well on your way to becoming free of self-judgment when it comes to your embroidery skills. You'll gain confidence by the simple fact that you've learned and practiced the stitches to the point where you are happy with how your stitches look. The outline stitch is one of the stitches I use the most for outlining shapes in my embroidery patterns, because it creates a raised line much smoother than a back stitch, and it has a twisted texture. But it's also great for filling shapes by working rows of outline stitches next to each other. For this stitch, I'm going to use a cross-stitch needle size 24 and 6 strands of 912 thread. To begin stitching, bring the needle up right at the beginning of your line, pull it through, go back into the fabric a stitch length away. Pull the thread gently and leave a loop on the surface of the fabric. Hold it down so it stays above the line you are working. Bring the needle up on the line next to where you started. And pull the thread all the way. Like this. Okay. For your next stitch, go down into the fabric a stitch length away. Consider this to be a stitch length, and from this point to this point, it's half of a stitch. So go down into the fabric a stitch length away, pull the thread gently but not all the way, leave a loop, and hold it so it stays above the line. Bring your needle up in the same hole of your previous stitch and pull it through all the way. The key here is to keep the working thread above the line at all times. So this is our working thread. Keep it above the line. Keep in mind that when you work curved shapes, you should shorten the length of the stitches to make sure that the stitches are following the curve of the line smoothly. If it's easier for you to remember, the loop should stay underneath the needle. As I approach the curve here, I'm gradually shortening the length of the stitches. When you reach the end of the line, the last stitch you create should be shorter than the previous stitches. And place it over the last stitch to create a half of a twist. Then secure the end of the thread to the existing stitches on the back of the fabric. This is the French knot, and it's used in hand embroidery as an isolated element or a bunch of knots to create a heavy feeling with a raised effect on large areas. It's created by wrapping the thread in a certain way around the needle, and I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm using the cross-stitch needle size 24 and 6 strands of floss of the darkest blue in our palette. We are going to fill this area on our pattern with scattered French knots. So bring your needle up to the front of the fabric and pull the thread all the way. Hold the working thread firmly with your non-dominant hand. Wrap the thread from the front to the back on the tip of your needle. Hold the thread on the needle with your finger to make sure it doesn't slip away, and go down into the fabric really close to where you came up, but not in the same hole. Start pulling the working thread away from the needle and down to the fabric. The loop should be as close as possible against the fabric. While still holding the working thread, pass the needle through the knot and pull the thread all the way. Release the working thread, just like so. So this is going to be your first French knot. Let's create another one. So bring the needle up, pull the thread all the way. With your non-dominant hand, hold the working thread, wrap the thread from the front to the back on the tip of your needle, hold the thread on the needle, and go back into the fabric really close to where you came up. Then pull the working thread and the loops on the needle away from the needle and close to the fabric. Then push the needle into the knot and then pull the thread all the way while slowly releasing the working thread. Let's do another one over here. Bring the needle up. Take your thread and wrap it on the needle from the front to the back and go down into the fabric really close to where you came up and pull the thread so the loops are very close to the fabric. A thing to remember is that you don't have to tighten the loops too much because it will be really difficult to pass the eye of the needle through the knot. And slowly release the working thread. Go ahead and create a few more knots over here. To create a bigger knot, you can vary the number of wraps around the needle. To do that, wrap the thread over the tip of the needle 1 time, 2 times, and go back into the fabric really close to where you came up. Pull the thread to the fabric, push the needle into the knot, and pull the thread all the way. And again. If you want to create a bigger knot than the one with 2 wraps, just wrap the thread around the needle 3 times. Let me do this again. One, two, three. Go ahead and fill this shape entirely with French knots and play around with the wraps around the needle. Also, you can try working with less threads than I did, just to see how it looks. This is the satin stitch, used in hand embroidery to cover small and large areas. The straight stitches placed next to each other create a smooth satin-like texture. Most beginners find the satin stitch difficult because it's challenging to maintain smooth edges of the shape and even harder to achieve a neat-looking satin texture. We are going to work on this shape that looks like half of a heart, and I'm using a cross-stitch needle size 24 and 6 strands of thread. Before starting, you have to decide the direction of your stitches. You could go this way or this way. I want the direction of my stitches to mirror the direction of the stitches over here. So I'm going to mark a few guidelines. Then Anchor your thread in an area that is going to be covered by stitching later in the process. Now we are going to run a few stitches to guide us in the process. So take your needle up at the edge of the design line and take it back into the fabric underneath the heavy stitch we have over here. And pull the thread all the way. Take your needle up again on the line of the design and go back into the fabric underneath your existing stitches over here. I often guide my thread to lay down on the fabric smoothly without any twists. In my embroidery process, I usually create the guidelining stitches only when I have to cover large areas. If the shape is too small, it's not necessary because you can control the direction of your stitches in a small area much better. Now your purpose is to cover all the spaces in between the guidelining stitches. Take your needle up really close to the last stitch you've made and take it down over here. You have to keep the same tension in the thread. Continue filling the spaces between the guidelining stitches without changing the direction of the stitches. If you have any questions about the satin stitch, feel free to comment in the comment section of this lesson. I'm more than happy to help. Here you go, this is how it looks in my hoop, and I really hope your satin stitch looks very similar to mine. If you found this tutorial helpful, imagine how much you'll learn in my course, The Beginner's Guide to Mastering 30 Essential Embroidery Stitches. Learning embroidery basics builds confidence and naturally shifts your focus from trying to get it perfect to enjoying the creative process itself. Thank you for staying with me till the end of this video. I love when you do that. Happy stitching!